and welcome to Season 3, Episode 45 of the WiSP Sports Desk with me, Chris Stafford, alongside Nancy Gillen in London. Nancy, first of all, before we go any further, how's Arsenal doing? Because I know you've had a bit of a rough ride recently with them.
Yeah, it was a difficult week last week. Well, about 10 days ago, we lost the FA Cup final and then we lost to Barcelona in the Champions League. And the men's team also lost both of their matches. But this weekend was a lot better. Got back to winning ways in the Women's Super League against Leicester. And then the men's team won as well. So hopefully that's kind of signalling a change in fortune. And we're coming out of this slightly rough patch.
Yeah, I hope so. What's your next game?
That's a really good question that I should know. I don't know. I'm going to quickly Google that.
Yeah. Well, tell us at the end of the show.
I know who the men are playing West Ham tomorrow, and I think that's why I don't know, because that's the next Arsenal game in my mind. Okay, they're playing Brighton on the weekend.
Okay.
So that will be quite a tough game because Brighton have good this season. But
home or away?
I think I've closed. Sorry, I've closed that.
Don't worry about it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I know Arsenal.
Oh, we're playing at home. We're playing at home.
Dear to your heart. Okay, you've got a home game to go to. As a fan, then you're not reporting on that.
Yeah, I could actually go to that as a fan because that's quite close to me. So yeah, I potentially might pop over.
There you go. Well, we've got more football news to come in the show. We've got a whole bunch of news from around the world as usual. And we're going to kick off with skiing just because it was another World Cup last week in St Moritz. And my girl, Lara Gut-Behrami, actually won the first giant slalom. But in the second one on the Sunday, she had a really bad fall. I don't know if you saw this, Nancy, but she went through 2 sets of netting and she was really fast at the top of the hill. And it, looked like she was going to win she obviously was favourite to win the second one. She's on such cracking form. But she did go flying and she got up and walked away and skied down later. But that was pretty frightening. But on the Saturday, she had it all her own way and she beat Sofia Goggia, who you remember, the Italian, had a double header in Lake Louise the previous week. So she got her revenge on home turf, which was great to see. And it was also great to see that she walked away from that fall. But in the second race on the Sunday of the Super G, Federica Brignoni, the Italian, got back to some form, and this was the first race she'd won of the season, and she beat her compatriot Elena Curtoni and Mikaela Shiffrin to win the second GS and become the most successful Italian skier with now 17 World Cup races to her credit. So it was a great weekend in St Moritz. They had to shorten the course a bit. The weather got to them, but hopefully next week, this coming weekend in Val d'Isère, the weather will be kind. They have a downhill on Saturday and they have a Super G on Sunday to look forward to this weekend. So let's see how that goes. I'm sure it's going to be the Swiss and the Italians and of course Mikaela Shiffrin battling that out in the perhaps in the downhill, but definitely in the Super G. It might look like the same trio that are competing there for podium places. So looking forward to that. And also in winter sports, you've heard us report here about the American slider, Elana Meyers-Taylor. She won now 3 monobob races out of the 4 this World Cup season. So she's having a tremendous start. She's preparing, of course, for the Olympic Games in Beijing next year. And this time she beat an Australian, which was unusual. You don't often see many Australians in bobsleigh and monobob, Nancy, but Brina Walker, she beat her by 0.06 of a second. That's how competitive the Australian was. It's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. And is that anything to do with the fact that monobob is a new discipline? Do you think maybe they've kind of seen a bit of a gap
potentially
to kind of get in and maybe get a medal in the Winter Olympics? Because I can't imagine Australia have many. That would be a good thing to look up, whether Australia have any Winter Olympic medals. But yeah, that's a good sign for Beijing.
Yeah, no, it certainly is good timing for her. But speaking of Antipodeans in winter sports. Do you remember Alice Robinson, the Kiwi, that she rose up the World Cup ladder in skiing, in alpine skiing last season?
Yeah, I do remember, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Well, she was actually fourth behind Federica Brignoni in the GS on this past Sunday. Yeah, so she's got some form now. We need to keep an eye out for her because she clearly is she's New Zealand's secret weapon because they don't have that many skiers in World Cup. She may be the only one, but yeah, we can't rule out the Australians and the Kiwis when it comes to winter sports. So we'll be keeping an eye out definitely for those two. We're going to turn to you now for the first story, non-winter sports story, and that's from horse racing. And that really caught the headlines this week in the UK when the jockey Robbie Dunne was suspended for 18 months for bullying Bryony Frost. And Bryony, we've mentioned on the show before because she's an outstanding jockey. That we're talking about horse racing here.
Yeah, I think she is, I believe, the most successful British female jockey, or the most successful female jockey of all time. She is, very, very impressive. And this investigation has been going on for kind of the past month or so. Between Robbie Dunne, who was accused of bullying and harassment by Bryony Frost, and he's been found guilty of in breach of 4 counts of conduct, prejudicial to the reputation of horse racing, and there's still yet 3 charges of violent or improper conduct yet to be considered. So potentially he could have a longer suspension. Because I've kind of been following this, some of the allegations that Frost made were quite shocking. I think it was kind of just violent language used towards her. There was one time when Dunne exposed himself to Frost in the weighing room. Frost as well kind of spoke in depth about how she felt when she made the complaints. She felt isolated and she felt quite ostracized from the rest of the jockeys. What I found interesting here is that the Professional Jockeys Association, they said that they had great sympathy with Frost and that they said that Dunne's conduct fell well short of the standard it expected, but that they opposed the findings of the panel, specifically on the weighing room culture. So, and said that they didn't believe that Dunne had been subjected to a remotely fair process. So I found that quite interesting that the organisation that represents jockeys, obviously Dunne and Frost are both jockeys there, but they've kind of sided with Dunne in this situation and gone against what the British Horse Racing Authority have said, and they were the ones that found Dunne guilty. So I thought that was quite an interesting dynamic there, that even though Frost has made these allegations and they've been found to be true, she's still kind of getting a bit of resistance within horse racing to what she said. So I'm hoping that this kind of doesn't really affect her too much and she can continue to have the brilliant career that she's been having.
Yeah, I hope so too, but that's pretty poor form, isn't it? When it's like your teammates are turning against you, reporting this incident. Yeah,
I think it was quite. Frost had said a bit about, there were not a lot of other female jockeys felt able to speak up because I suppose they kind of, they were all in the same situation. Basically, they all had to be in the same weighing room and stuff, and they were worried what was going to happen to them. So she has been quite courageous to speak out there. And hopefully Dunne kind of changes his ways. He has that ban and he learns and changes his ways, because he was obviously not making horse racing a very kind of welcoming and inclusive place.
Yeah, that's very sad to see. But as you say, hopefully she'll be able to continue and, not feel intimidated when she goes in the weighing room now, and be able to continue her fantastic career. So good luck to her, and kudos to her for standing up to these guys. Really, really, really shows, how strong women can be. And we have to do this. We have to disrupt the patriarchy, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially when, you're in a environment that is massively male dominated, the majority of jockeys are male. So yeah, I think, like I said, just very courageous to speak out and hopefully change the culture for future female jockeys coming in. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we're going to talk to jump to another similar story this involves violence in football, in French football. And we reported this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, about the French soccer star Mikaela Hamraoui, who was assaulted.
Yeah, so this story, like you said, came out kind of a few weeks ago, a month ago, and was very, very bizarre. I think initially the reports that were coming out, so yeah, like you said, this PSG football player, so French and PSG player, Mikaela Hamraoui, she was attacked one night by men with an iron bar. So they hit her on her hands and on her legs. And this news only came out when one of her teammates, Aminata Diallo, she was arrested and taken into police custody on the suspicion that she'd conducted the attack. And the police kind of thought that potentially a motive might be because they played in the same position for club and country, and Diallo wanted to get rid of the competition, essentially. But then a few days later, she was released. It then started to get a bit even more strange, where there's a famous men's footballer called Eric Abidal. He used to play for Barcelona. He's now retired, but he was one of those players when I was growing up who was, one of like a Barcelona star. They found out that the SIM card in Hamraoui's phone was registered to Abidal, and then there were suspicions that they had an affair, and then Abidal's wife organised the attack. So there was all these reports coming out, and essentially the New York Times did a quite in-depth report where the headline is "The Truth is Elusive in Attack on a French Soccer Star," and I think that's exactly it. There's so many details to the story; it seems so intricate. No one's 100% sure what is right. The police don't seem to know either, because everyone's still kind of under suspicion. And it says here that it could, the investigation could take months and months. We might not even know for ages. But there are some quite interesting details within this story. One's about, I think that the PSG might be in turmoil now because of it. So PSG and Lyon are the best two teams in France, and PSG were doing really well in the league, but after this attack happened, they got thrashed 6-1 by Lyon, and I think we're a bit out of sorts. But within this article, this report, it said that Hamraoui accused several, not just Diallo, but several of her teammates of potentially being linked with the attack. And then because of that, her teammates don't want to play with her, or they have asked to move their lockers away from her in the dressing room, which potentially, that's not the best team dynamic going on. So yeah, it's definitely worth a read, because it's a long read, but it's, if you're kind of interested in the story and want to know where the case is at right now, and kind of, I think there's, all the information that is available was in this story. Yes. And like I said, it still means it's elusive. You're still not 100% sure what happened, but it helps you kind of get some of the detail. So it's well worth a read. Yeah, and as a criminal offence, of course, it's still an unresolved case. Yeah. But as you said, it is a good read. And the links to this story and all of those that we cover, just to remind you, they are on our website at wisports.com. We're going to move to gymnastics now. Now we've come to another milestone in the story of the Larry Nassar cases, and the victims have now reached a settlement valued at $380 million with USA Gymnastics. Now, I did the maths on this, Nancy, and that's only $76,000 per victim, because we're talking about 500 victims in this case. It's extraordinary. Yeah, I think that's always kind of what you've got to consider here, because I remember previously there's been a settlement offer which was rejected for that reason. It seemed like a large sum amount, but then when you divided it among the sheer amount of survivors, it was hardly anything. But I think the majority of the survivors seem quite happy with this. Like you said, it isn't very much, but Rachel Den Hollander, who was the first woman to publicly accuse Nassar of abuse, said she was relieved to have reached a conclusion for this battle for compensation. So she said, this chapter is finally closed. Now the hard work of reform and rebuilding can begin. Whether or not justice comes and change is made depends on what happens next. So I think there is that kind of feeling that this process of restoring justice can't go on forever, and that it needs, there needs to be a settlement made, and then you can move on to kind of building the foundations to make sure it doesn't happen again. Den Hollander did say that, the money doesn't really heal the survivors. She said, tomorrow everyone wakes up still living the consequences. Don't lose that reality in the midst of sober rejoicing in the truth. Another detail that I thought was quite interesting was that USA Gymnastics agreed to set up a restorative justice program as part of the settlement. And under those terms, survivors will have a significant say in how USA Gymnastics deal with future allegations of sexual abuse. So I think kind of obviously the settlement fee is a large part of it, but it's also kind of how they're going to deal with hopefully there won't be similar issues in the future, but preventing similar issues in the future.
And they'll have a system in place and the athletes are involved in that process. Yeah,
exactly. So that's, that is quite a positive thing out of it. And it does seem like now the focus is fully on, what comes next, as opposed to getting compensation for the past. That's now a line has been drawn under that now. But I think, there's very kind of public survivors, people like Simone Biles, who I haven't seen react to anything. And she's been obviously very outspoken about it, very critical of USA Gymnastics. But she has, they voted on this and it was a majority vote to agree on the settlement. So yeah, it would be interesting to see if there is any criticism of it or kind of discontent with it coming out in the next few days.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye on that one for you. And staying with gymnastics, it was just announced that Tom Forster, the high performance director at USA Gymnastics, has actually stepped down. And I don't know if you saw this, but Simone Biles actually posted a cryptic message on Twitter that Tom leaving was not the answer to the problem.
I didn't actually see that. No, that's quite interesting in itself as well. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, kind of, I presume that's aimed at the people right at the very top.
Yes, certainly in management, absolutely. Yeah. So they're looking now for a new high performance director.
Yeah, well, that's very hopefully all the procedures in place for that will be, there'll be adequate recruitment there to make sure that the right person is in the job. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see as well, seeing as I've said here, the survivors will have a bit of an input into things, whether they will in that situation have any kind of input at all.
Yes, and you'd like to think there'd be more women coaches, more women in management positions in sport, but it wasn't necessarily the answer. When the Carolis were in power, do you remember Martha Caroli? Mm-hmm. She was the national team coordinator at the time, and she had complete control over the women's program, which it turned out to be the downfall. She selected the teams. She was very instrumental in USGM and in the entire operation of USA Gymnastics. But she was reported to have very harsh methods of running that ship, so to speak, and she was blamed for what they call the toxic culture that allowed Nassar and others to abuse young gymnastics. So, whether a woman's in that place or not, it's still got to be the right woman.
Yeah, and I think as well when British Gymnastics had kind of not, it was more kind of verbal abuse and psychological abuse, but there were a lot of female coaches involved with that as well. So yeah, it's never quite the solution. I think it's also kind of the structure around them. And, procedures in place that stop people going almost kind of power crazy or having complete control over the gymnasts. So it's definitely lots of elements to it.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we've got the Beijing Olympics coming up in February. We'll have a lot more of that to talk about in the new year, of course, when we come back for a new season of the WiSP Sports Desk. But one of the things that did happen since last week, and we saw this started here with the US announcing a diplomatic boycott of Beijing, and now other countries have joined with that boycott, haven't they?
Yeah. So, last week the US announced their boycott. So now Australia, the United Kingdom and Canada are also joining the US. And I think there's been quite a few other kind of smaller countries also announcing a boycott as well. So it's kind of gaining momentum. As mentioned last week, this is over the human rights abuses or alleged human rights abuses in China. So must be remembered though that it's a diplomatic boycott. So the athletes will still be competing, but there won't be kind of politicians and representatives from each country there. I think it's, like I said, gaining momentum, and I'm expecting to see more countries announce boycotts in the next 2 months, probably right up until the games themselves in February.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I think there'll be more impetus behind that as we get closer to the games. Well, we're going to turn to football now. I've got a few stories this week, and I think we have to start sort of chronologically, because since we spoke last week, that evening, I think, where the show went out, I think it was Wednesday, was the Chelsea game against Juventus. It was at the Chelsea ground, wasn't it?
Yeah, at Kingsmeadow. Yeah,
at Kingsmeadow,
London. And
Sam Kerr, who of course plays for the Matilda, she's captain of the Australian team, but she's also, let's say, a very high-profile player for Chelsea, and a very successful one too. There was an incident on the pitch. Now, you and I texted about this afterwards, but explain exactly what happened, Nancy.
Yeah, so towards the end of the match, it was actually pretty near the final whistle. A man ran onto the pitch. He ran up to Magda Eriksson, who's the Chelsea captain. I think tried to take a selfie with her, but she was kind of very dismissive. And then he kind of just was walking around and then walked near Sam Kerr, and she essentially kind of ran into him, shoulder barged him and knocked him over. And then she got booked. She got a yellow card for that. I think as soon as it happened, you don't really see many pitch invaders in women's football. So I think it was, obviously caused a lot of attention. At the same time, people were like, where are the stewards in that situation? Because if that happens in men's football, they might be able to run around by themselves for a bit if they're faster than the steward, but they will always have a steward chasing them, and they'll always get taken down eventually. But this guy was just kind of allowed to just run up to the players and stuff. And I think, I think I tweeted something like, if I was a player and I just had a random man running at me, I'd actually be quite scared. Because you don't really, especially in women's sport, there's all kind of horrible social media abuse and stuff like that. So you just, you'd maybe be a bit scared that some of that was coming out in real life or something. Anyway, so after a few, this week, The Athletic did a report into the incident and found that the pitch invader wasn't actually arrested. And it's a bit complex. I think the Home Office were, saying one thing and there are reports of the other thing. But I think essentially it's been worked out that in that instance, the fan could have been arrested by the police, but the majority of women's games in the UK, if they're domestic games, if they're like Arsenal-Chelsea, there isn't the law that sees pitch invaders arrested has a loophole where it doesn't include women's football. I think essentially because obviously, in years gone by, whenever the law was from, obviously they didn't even consider women's football. And it's never been a case where they've been like, we need to include women's football in this. So it means that, you could be at, say, the Arsenal-Chelsea match at the FA Cup final at Wembley. You could have had someone run on the pitch there and they wouldn't have been arrested for it, which just shows that the safety, player protection and safety in women's sport is not as high as it is in the men's. I don't think that should be the case. And that, that loophole needs to be changed ASAP, especially as women's football is getting more and more popular. You're getting more people going to games and therefore increasing the likelihood of pitch invaders. So, it was a really kind of interesting situation, which I think initially seemed quite amusing, but has now kind of evolved into something more serious. And I know there's been a number of the female MPs here have written to the Secretary of State for Sport, urging him to close that loophole. So hopefully that will happen quite soon.
And I also read that there are not necessarily many police attending these games in England either. There's not a great police presence. So isn't it up to the clubs to provide security? I think so. Obviously, the clubs do stewards. So the police would be whoever the police authority is, and then the clubs do stewards. So I think it would be definitely up to the club to provide more stewards. Say when I was at the match at the Emirates, I was at Arsenal-Barcelona in the Women's Champions League on Thursday. Because you're playing at the Emirates, they've got enough stewards as for the men's game, so they've got everyone there. But I think when they've got the games in Boreham Wood, I'm sure they have nowhere near as many. And I think, when I go to women's games in smaller stadiums, the level of security is absolutely nowhere near as high. And you don't have stewards kind of, facing the crowd or lining the pitch to make sure people don't go over. I don't know. I think the onus lies on the club. I think it owns on people like the FA to make sure the clubs are implementing it, and the police as well to, if there needs to be a police presence, to provide that. So, it just needs to improve a lot. And for people who don't know what the Emirates is or Boreham Wood, just explain.
The Emirates is Arsenal's main stadium where the men play. So got a capacity of 60,000. And then Boreham Wood is where the women play. So that's a much, much smaller stadium. I think a capacity of about 5,000 maybe. Just the difference there is, even though obviously with 5,000, that's a lesser crowd, but you still need a really good level of security, which just isn't there at the moment. Right,
absolutely. Well, my question, and I haven't really had it answered, I've done a bit of research myself, is whether Sam Kerr, I know the public opinion was that she should not have been given a yellow card for that. But my question is that in the rules? This was a game under FIFA rules, wasn't it? Because it was involved an international team.
Yeah, I think it might have been UEFA because it was Champions League.
UEFA. Okay.
But it would have been a FIFA referee, a referee that was accredited by FIFA.
So does it come under their jurisdiction then to include the general public, anything that is non-playing? Because this was clearly nothing to do with the game itself, not involving another player. This was just Sam shouldering this invader, the pitch invader. Does this come under their jurisdiction, or was it just her using her own discretion for unsportsmanlike behaviour?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I think the way I could see it is that I suppose the referee's responsible for the behaviour of the players. So whether that's, because a player, if they took their, if you take your shirt off on the pitch, you get a yellow card. And I suppose that's not really affecting the match, or it's not really involving anyone else. Maybe it's it's something that she did earned her the yellow card. I mean, I don't think she should have been booked for it, but whether it came under the referee's jurisdiction, I suppose because it happened technically during the match on the field of play, it does. But I'm not sure. Conduct unbecoming.
So just go back to that point then. I didn't know they could get a yellow card for taking their shirt off. Does that men and women can get a yellow card for completely removing?
Yeah, so if it happens more in men's football, because if they celebrate and take off their shirt to celebrate, you get a yellow card for that.
Okay, so Brandy Chastain, of course, the US player, she raised her shirt. Do you remember when she scored that goal that infamously?
Yeah.
So I didn't notice whether she got a yellow card for that. If anybody's listening and knows the history.
I don't think the rule was in place then, because I think it's only been in the past like 10, 15 years that it's been a rule.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to another rule now, because there's some news it's happening as we record here on Tuesday that US Soccer, USWNT agree to stop paying NWSL salaries. Tell us more about that.
Yep. So US Soccer and this is kind of part of the US Soccer and the United States or USWNT Players Association working on their new collective bargaining agreement. So this move was always kind of expected, but it is now official. And there's also been a 3-month extension to the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, until March, because of the whole issue with wanting equal pay and stuff. I think that's going to be something that always rumbles on. But yeah, at this stage, US Soccer have stopped paying the NWSL wages. I think this is definitely a positive thing. I think the US Soccer have paid the wages of their national team players since 2012 when they founded the NWSL. But it limited kind of massively what the players could do. So they were paid a certain salary, which was higher than the average salary in the NWSL, but it meant that they couldn't really move abroad or anything like that. So it was only a certain number of USWNT players could go overseas, and that number was 3 in 2021, so quite low. I think we've also seen in some of the abuse cases that have come out in recent months, a lot of the players have seen that the fact that US Soccer are paying their wages is almost kind of a bit of like, I know Kristen Press said this, that she felt like she couldn't speak out against her club because then it would affect her place in the national team. So it's kind of, it's a bit restrictive in that sense. So a lot of, I think it's going to see a lot more freedom, I think, for the national team players. And they are now joining the NWSL Players Association as well. So I think there's going to be kind of within individual clubs and stuff, a lot more power with the players. I think it's quite an interesting one. And like I said before, with the collective bargaining agreement now extended for another 3 months, that's going to be quite a big factor. I can't see them, agreeing that unless US Soccer introduce equal pay for the national teams, essentially. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out as well.
It certainly is. We'll keep an eye on that one for you. Well, if I said she was an NWSL champion, she had 190 caps for her country and scored 115 international goals. That can only be one player.
Alex Morgan.
And she has a new team to go to.
Yeah, so she's announced that she will be heading over to San Diego Wave. If you've never heard of that team before, it's because it's brand new. It's joining the NWSL next season. And it's, the exciting team. They've got Casey Stoney, who previously coached Manchester United. They've brought her over. I believe Jill Ellis is part of the executive of that club. So it's kind of got a lot of big names in women's football. I think, Morgan said she's from Southern California, so she's kind of going back home, as it were. And she said in a statement that she sees her family settling down in San Diego. So it sounds like this is the club that she's going to be at until her retirement, essentially. Yeah,
she did say that. This is going to see her playing career out. Yeah.
Yeah. I also saw that there was a bit of controversy with this, just because I think Orlando Pride hadn't announced that Morgan had left. I think San Diego Wave had jumped the gun a bit in announcing this, which I know has maybe caused a little bit of fuss, but obviously it's still happening. And it's interesting. I find these new clubs really, just as someone not in America, I find these new clubs just really interesting, just how they just created from nothing essentially and recruit all these players, because it's something that doesn't happen over here. So it's the same with Los Angeles, LA.
Yes, the Angels.
Angel City, that's the one. Yeah. The other new club that's joining next season. It's just interesting to see. Yeah, these clubs kind of build from the ground up. So, congrats to San Diego Wave, because obviously Morgan is a very good player.
Yes. Wonderful to secure her for the rest of her playing career, alongside another teammate, international teammate, and that's Abby Dalkemper, the defender. So they'll always join somebody they know on these teams, right, when they move around, and it is still transfer season over here. Now, talking about North American and development of football in North America, you know, Canada has been always sadly lacking in a league, in their league. But there's been news coming out of there about expanding that league a bit.
Yeah, so like you said, it's always been an interesting thing. I think that you've had the NWSL, which is one of the biggest women's football leagues in the world. And then just next door in Canada, there hasn't really been much for women's footballers. You've seen Canadians basically just playing the NWSL. It was a bit of a strange situation where an account called Women's Premier Soccer League Canada tweeted this kind of video with the caption, "We're answering the call for a Canadian Women's League. Get ready, Canada. # we are coming." Which probably did cause some excitement because, people have, been wanting this kind of professional women's football league in Canada for quite a while. But then there was also a bit of criticism as well, because Stephanie Lab, their national team, their
goalie,
their goalie. She said that it wasn't quite answering the call because there wasn't any reference to professional. They want, obviously, if there's going to be a women's football league, it's got to be professional now.
Yeah.
So all a bit mysterious, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Yeah,
it is a bit ominous actually, because it was broken on Twitter. As so many stories are, right? Bit like Alex Morgan's story, the San Diego jumped the gun there on Twitter. But we'll watch that develop, because it would be very welcome if they did create a substantial league in Canada. Although that would mean less Canadian players coming down to the US clubs. So there's the upside and downside to that.
Yeah, right. But like you said, the national team is so successful that I think they definitely deserve their own league. So.
They definitely, absolutely, certainly now being Olympic champions. Now, we're going to move on to tennis. We've got a few stories in tennis, but I love this, the big headlines from tennis this week. And you found this. You beat me to it on this one, Nancy, that ESPN announced that Amelie Mauresmo, the former French player, now retired, and she's been a coach for a while. She's been named the director of the French Open on her home turf in Paris there, where she has a family and she's from there. So this is a terrific news, because the first time a woman has been in that position.
Yeah, it's, Mauresmo, I think, has been quite a trailblazing woman in tennis, like as a player, as a coach. I know her because she coached Andy Murray, and it's almost, first thing, you don't really see many female coaches in tennis. And secondly, a female coach coaching a male tennis player is almost unheard of. And so, she's now the first ever female director of the French Open, and the second woman to be appointed as a Grand Slam director after Stacey Alister, the US Open tournament director. Mm-hmm. It's really great news. I think she said she's very proud to be the first woman director of Roland Garros. And that she says it's necessary to emphasize why she's here, other than because of her gender. And that she aims to move towards something more egalitarian, regardless of gender, and kind of all about skill as opposed to gender. And I think it's, tennis has always been one of the sports which has probably the most equality in it out of kind of all, it's not perfect, but compared to a lot of other sports, it's pretty good. And then in this situation, to have, you've now got 2 of the 4 Grand Slams are run by women. That's a big move, and hopefully positive for not just women's tennis, but all of tennis as a whole.
Yeah, I love this. We're going to make that our headlines this week, because it is so important to have a woman in that position, and obviously great career move for her. And she's a busy woman too. She's got 2 toddlers, a boy and a girl, and they'd be, toddlers, like, I don't know, they got to be, 5, 6, 7, something like that. So, but she does live in that area. So she's going to be a busy woman managing her toddlers and running the French Open, which will be here before we know it once we get into 2022.
Yeah, it will be, yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to Australian Open now, another Grand Slam, because there's been another significant withdrawal. We mentioned one last week, Bianca Andreescu, the Canadian player, but this one is an American.
Yeah, so Serena Williams has withdrawn from the Australian Open. She says that she just isn't where she wants to be fitness-wise, and yeah, essentially she said she's not where I need to be physically to compete. She last played at Wimbledon in June and picked up a leg injury then, so suggests that she's still kind of recovering from that. Yeah, and I think it's obviously interesting. She's been trying for quite a long time now to get that elusive 24th Grand Slam title. I think last year she wasn't, she did well in the Australian Open at the start of last year, but other than that, struggled a bit. So it's kind of looking more and more unlikely. And I suppose every tournament that she can't play or doesn't play, it just makes it kind of that 24th Grand Slam a little more out of her reach. So it will be a shame to not have her there, but I think it would be doubtful. I don't want to call her out. I don't want to, put her down or anything or doubt her, because I'm sure she'd probably do something incredible. But it would be doubtful that I think she'd be, in contention for the title anyway. But yeah, it will be a shame that she won't be competing.
Yeah, and we've got news about Emma Raducanu contracting COVID and having to withdraw from a tournament in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, so she headed out to the Middle East, I think, for some pre-season and to play in this exhibition event in Abu Dhabi, but has got COVID, so she's now isolating. She is scheduled to play in a warm-up tournament in Melbourne in January and then go on to the Australian Open. So she should be fine for that, but it's obviously not massively ideal. I think she's been speaking about this pre-season quite a lot as obviously because she was very new to the WTA tour. She didn't quite have that level of fitness that you needed. And she was really, I think, hoping in this pre-season to get her fitness up to those levels. So having COVID is very detrimental to that. Not just because you're out of action for a while, but obviously it can have a big effect on your lungs and stuff. So hopefully she's okay and can get the prep done that she needs to for the Australian Open.
Because that next season would be her first full season on the Pro Tour, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I know, she's got this ridiculous record at Grand Slams, reaching the 4th round of Wimbledon and then winning the US Open. I'm sure she would want to continue that record at the Australian Open, but also she's so young, it will just be tournament experience. And obviously COVID hasn't always been an issue, but you do get these kind of ups and downs on the tour. So I imagine she's kind of just taking it all as like a learning experience. Yes, hopefully. And she has a new coach too, doesn't she? So it's going to be an interesting evolution as she comes out of this winter into the first Grand Slam of the season. We're going to stay with tennis now for WTA awards, because Miss Ash Barty, the Australian player, number 1, it's really her year, isn't it? And she just announced her engagement, and now she's been awarded the WTA Player of the Year. Yeah, it's very hard not to kind of give it to anyone but Barty. She's just had such a brilliant year, winning her second Grand Slam at Wimbledon, she's winning the Miami Open, also won in Melbourne at the start of the year, won the Stuttgart Open, Cincinnati Open, and then she ended the year as well number 1 and qualified for the WTA finals, but decided to head home instead. But yeah, she's really consolidated herself at the top of women's tennis, and fully deserving of Player of the Year. Raducanu as well was named Newcomer of the Year, obviously after her improbable success at the US Open. And then it was nice to see Carla Suarez Navarro as well the Spanish player. She won Comeback Player of the Year because she recovered from Hodgkin's lymphoma to return to the court. She has now retired, but she did play, quite a fair bit this year. So that's a nice touch for them to give her that award.
Yeah, that's lovely. And she was given a wonderful send-off, wasn't she, when she retired? We talked about that before. But just going back, as you said, that there really is no one else but Ash Barty that they could have given this to. This is going to be the second time that she's won the WTA Player of the Year. And now that this is going to be her third consecutive year at number one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's worth bearing in mind that, there was the period where she didn't play for nearly a year, but the rankings were frozen because of COVID. And I think some people were like, she shouldn't be number one because essentially she was there because of a technicality. But she's come back this year and been like, this is why I'm number one, because she is the best player in the world. So yeah, fully deserving of that.
And to wrap up this week, we've got tis the award season after all. We've got a couple more awards to announce. If you missed those in the news, that is the Times Athlete of the Year and then the World Rugby Player of the Year. Just tell us about those, Nancy.
Yeah, so Simone Biles was named Times Athlete of the Year. I think probably for kind of what she was doing off the court as well as on the court. Obviously, she had a very difficult Olympics and had to withdraw from the majority of her events. But I think they've given it to her for being open about mental health struggles and discussing that very openly. I think also what she, the courage she's shown with dealing with the Larry Nassar situation, because there were a few occasions where she had to give testimony this year as well. So I think that is a big award, and to have a female athlete win it, when they're also considering male athletes is really significant. And yeah, that's, great. Congratulations to her for that. And then, moving on to the rugby awards, it's great news for England. Zoe Aldcroft, the English rugby player, she was named World Rugby's Women's Player of the Year. It's after a pretty amazing, I think we've talked last week about the year that the Red Roses has had, unbeaten, thrashed New Zealand in 2 matches, won the Women's Six Nations again. And Aldcroft was one of those standout players. So I think to have the best women's rugby player in the world, that's incredible for England, and looking forward to the Women's Rugby World Cup next year.
Yes, certainly they are on a roll right now, aren't they, England? The England Roses are blooming for sure. We look forward to much more rugby and skiing and football and just about anything else, you name it. We try and cover it here on the show. And the end of the year, which will be next week, will be, I should say, our end of year show. It's going to be a review of the year. Nancy and I are going to pick some of our highlights, and I think there's plenty to choose from, Nancy, isn't there? It won't be too short of ideas for the way women have been performing. Obviously, we had the Olympic Games. We've had a lot of major competitions this year, despite COVID. So that's going to be a fun conversation next week. So you're going to start to make your list, Nancy?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to be, like you said, it's been just everything across all sports. It's been amazing. So I'm going to spend all week thinking about it.
All right. Well, we'll bring that to you the same time, same place next week. In the meantime, don't forget you can check the show notes that go with this episode at wisports.com. You can follow us and share and like and make your comments on social media. And you can also reach us not only at WiSports on social media, but if you want to drop us a line, that's info@wisports.com. We'd love to hear from you what you think of the show. And if you have any ideas for next year, we'll be back with a new season in January. And we also always love to hear from you. And if you have any time to leave us a review or a comment, a rating on your podcast app, that helps others find the show too. And you can find Nancy on social media at?
I'm at Nancy_Gillen on Twitter, and then Nancy Gillen _sport on Instagram. And I write for Give Me Sport Women, which on Twitter is Give Me Sport W.
All right. And we've been doing this, I think, 4 years now, Nancy. Coming next year, this will be season 4 of the Sports Desk.
Yeah, that's quite incredible, isn't it? And being through a pandemic and everything, but I think ultimately we've seen a massive rise in in women's sport.
Yeah, and certainly we like to increase our coverage right here and give voice to women in sport to amplify women's voices. So join us again next week. In the meantime, that's it from Nancy and I. Thank you very much for listening. Take care.